Assistant Director of Sponsored Programs, Subawards Division at the University of Central Florida. She is a subject matter expert in subawards. She has a Master's of Business Administration and is a certified research administrator. She has worked in the research administration field since 2008. Danielle Hanna is a Subaward Specialist 3 in the Subawards Unit, Office of Research at the University of Central Florida. She has worked in sponsored research for over 10 years and at UCF for over 8 years. Danielle has been working in subawards for over 3 years. Prior to that, she held several positions in sponsored research at UCF as a coordinator, proposal manager, and contract manager. And now I will hand it over to Tamaria and Danielle. Ladies.
Thank you, Celeste. Hello, everybody. We want to welcome you to our presentation. What you see before you is our agenda. Please note that there is a part 1 and a part 2. Today, we're going to be doing part 1, and we will be hosting part 2 on Thursday. So our agenda for today is going to start with what is a subaward. We're going to go over outgoing versus incoming subawards, the subaward versus vendor determination, proper subaward preparation, subawards at the proposal stage, and risk assessments. So let's start with what is a subaward. A subaward is an award provided by a pass-through entity to a subrecipient for that subrecipient to carry out part of the federal award received by the pass-through entity or the PTE. It does not include payments to a contractor or an individual that's beneficiary of a federal program. A subaward may be provided through any form of legal agreement, including an agreement that the pass-through entity considers a contract. That is very important because here in research, some of our terms are very interchangeable. So no matter if we call them a sub-awardee, subcontract, just know that that is not what determines if it is a subrecipient or a subaward or not. Next slide, please. So some definitions. What is a subaward? Subrecipient, a non-federal entity that receives a subaward from pass-through entity to carry out part of the federal program. That just basically means it's an entity that you as the prompt, you've received an award and you're going to subcontract out some of that work for someone else to complete. A subaward cannot be used for procurement or routine goods and services, and it is determined by the nature of the relationship and not the name of the agreement. So it is the nature of the relationship that determines if you have a subaward or not. Next slide.
So we have outgoing and incoming outgoing and incoming subawards. Yes, there is a difference. And yes, some people do get them confused with one another. So we're going to just give the definitions of the different two outgoing versus incoming subawards. Outgoing subawards are when the institution receives funding from the sponsor, the subawards, and subawards a portion of the work to another institution. Incoming subawards are when another institution, pass-through entity, receives funding from a sponsor, and that institution subawards a portion of their work to your institution. We are going to be focusing on outgoing subawards for this particular presentation. So that is what we're going to be focusing on today.
Subaward determination. The uniform guidance clarifies that it's the pass-through entity's responsibility to make a case-by-case determination on whether the role of the sub-entity is a subrecipient or a contractor / vendor. So as a third party, we are required to make that determination every time is this third party going to be a subcontractor, or are they a vendor or a consultant? So some of the characteristics to look for when trying to make that determination is with subcontractors. Those services are uniquely designed in response to each project, and those services are not provided commercially. Whereas when you have a vendor, those goods and services are provided within their normal scope of business. Basically, if you can pay for those services, they will provide you with those services. So that is one of the biggest difference between a subcontractor and a vendor. Additionally, with your subcontractor, usually your technical lead is usually a scientific collaborator or a co-I. With your vendor, again, they provide similar goods and services to many different purchasers in a competitive environment. With subcontractors, they retain the rights to their IP or their intellectual property. With vendors, they retain no rights to intellectual property. With your subcontractors, they participate in the development and the execution of the statement of work. That vendor provides goods and services, and those goods and services are ancillary to the operation of the federal program. Additionally, your vendors are not subject to compliance requirements of the federal award. With your subcontractor, they would be subject to those requirements. So you would have to flow down those terms and conditions to your subcontractor. Next slide, please. Additional information on your subaward determination. This information is very important to make the right determination. So we're giving you some more examples of things to consider. With your subcontractor, it typically requires approval of the sponsor if it is not included in your original proposal. With your vendors, they do not require prior approval from your sponsor, but they are subject to rebudgeting restrictions imposed by that category of costs where you're moving those funds. With your subcontractor, those indirect costs are assessed only on the first $25,000 of each approved funding cycle. With your vendor, your indirect costs are assessed on the entire award amount. So this is also very important when you're looking at your proposal and you're looking at your third party and trying to make that determination, because it clearly affects your budget. So again, it's very important when you're making this determination. Subcontractors are exempt from sole source justification or open bid requirements. That is, unless it's issued under a federal contract. Your vendors are subject to sole source documentation and bid requirements. Additionally, again, your subcontractor is subject to federal subcontracting monitoring requirements where your vendor is not. So again, it's very important to make the correct determination. And unfortunately, it's not always easy to make that determination. So these are just some considerations you should have. Danielle, next slide, please. So here we would like to talk about making that determination. We do use different tools at the University of Central Florida. We do have a form here called the Subaward Predetermination Form that we use to help to look at these characteristics. If there ever is a question about what our third party should be, we look and we fill out this form. We have our departmental staff fill out this form, and we look at the scope of work. We look at our scope of work. What are we tasked with doing? What is this third party tasked with doing? And what is the relationship between the two? Again, this slide is small. The form is hard to see, but this will be made available along with the presentation, the tools that we use to make that subaward determination. Next slide. We have a breakout session. So again, we've specified how important it is to make the determination on your third party if they're an actual subrecipient or if they are a contractor or a vendor. So we have a case study here that we would like you guys to read. We're going to give you 10 minutes and break you out into sessions, and we want you to discuss the case study and then make a determination as to why you feel like this subrecipient is a subrecipient. Are they a vendor? What are your reasons for that classification? And we would like a couple of people to come, once we come back, just to give us your determination and why you made that determination. So please work together to make that determination. Once you go into the breakout room, you will not be able to see this slide. So we're going to leave it up here so you can take a screenshot of it, so you can have all of the pertinent information, because you will need this information in order to make your determination. We're going to leave this slide up for a minute, and then after a minute, we're going to break you out into breakout rooms. So please discuss.
I think we have most people back in. So if anyone would like to discuss what they discussed in their breakout room, you can just raise your hand and we'll have Celeste unmute you so you can talk for your room.
Or put it in the chat.
Either is fine.
Either is fine.
We have
Celeste Shock.
Okay, so I'm new and I'm still learning a lot, but when we talked in our group, we had talked about how usually they are vendors, but I think most of us were thinking that probably because they were leading data analysis, that it would be more likely that in this case, they might be a subawardee.
Thank you, Celeste. Does anybody else from their group want to chime in?
So my group, most of us pretty much said we thought it was a vendor, just because I know how you and Danielle like to trick us.
Thank you, Mary Davis. Okay, we're gonna, one more. So we have one for subrecipient and one for vendor. Can we get one more response, please? We have a Toby Larson. If Toby is muted, could someone please unmute Toby?
There we go. We felt there was some discussion back and forth, but we felt leaned more to a subrecipient because it seems that the nature of the work they're doing is different than the normal nature of the work that they give out to everyone else on a general commercial basis. Plus the fact that they were involved in planning and leading analysis data, or the data analysis as well.
Thank you so much, Toby. I want to thank everybody that participated and responded. So I'll give you a little background on this. This is an actual scope of work of that has come through our office. Of course, all the proprietary information has been changed, but this was an actual scope of work that we had to look at to make that determination. So I can I use this one because it was very tricky, because again, this particular entity has been used as the vendor. This particular entity does provide these services commercially. However, you really needed more information to make this determination. One thing that I left out of this case study was our UCF's actual scope of work. What are we tasked with doing? What is our task? And is this particular third party doing part of that task? I can tell you after review that this particular entity did end up being an actual subrecipient for us because of the type of work they were doing. They are actually doing programmatic work. So that's why I use this one as a good case study to see it is not always easy to make that determination, but for this particular, even though this entity had been used as a vendor prior, because what they were doing on this particular project and the substantive work that they were doing, they were actually a subrecipient. So again, I wanted to just show you how it's not always black and white. It is not always clear. There are several pieces of information that you need to look at in order to make this determination. And I want to thank you for your participation, and I hope you enjoyed it. And yes, Mary, I was trying to trick you. So thank you.
Okay, guys, we're going to move forward. So the next slide is proper subaward preparation, which we call PEP. Having a good PEP process in place will make the overall subaward process more efficient and help all parties involved move the subaward through the process more smoothly. So having all the correct documents in this type of situation, a PEP starts at proposal stage. We don't want to wait till the award is in place. When we're dealing with subawards, we want to, if we know that there are going to be subawards on a award, we want to start at the proposal stage with gathering all the information from the subrecipients. So having all the correct documents. And we know sometimes there are some awards where at a time of award, subawards may change or information may change, budget, something like that. But at that point in time when we're doing the proposal, we want all those correct documents at that time. We want to have those for every single subaward, not one if there's 3, all of the subawards. We want all of the correct documents. We want to know what your role is within the overall process, meaning if you're at the department level, making sure you have everything you need, you're working with your PI. If you're at the sponsor research office, making sure you're doing everything that's in place depending on your institution, whatever those requirements are for you when it comes to the subawards. We want to make sure that, because in our office, we have different departments that everyone has some part within the subaward process, whether it's our award managers, whether it's our proposal managers, whether it's the subaward team. We want to make sure everyone has their part and they are ready at the proposal stage and then through the life of the subaward. Preparing as early as possible is going to be key when it comes to subawards. Gathering all the final documents, receiving any and all approvals if necessary. Now, at this point, we're at the time of the award. So once we get the award, we want to make sure we have all the final documents. So if there's anything that has changed, we want to make sure we have that information for the subs and we're ready to move forward. Receiving any approvals if there's some that we needed, if there's IRB, if we need to get additional approval from the sponsor, we want to make sure we have all of that stuff as it relates to the subawards in the award. Have the correct contacts information, the subaward contacts information. When you're dealing with subawardees, you want to make sure you're contacting the correct person because sometimes you can get the runaround if you have 4 or 5 different people and you're reaching out to someone and you did a subaward with a subaward institution and it was 5 years ago and the individual you're emailing it no longer even works at the institution. So we want to make sure we have the correct contact information for our subawardees so that we can communicate and work through the process and get the subawards executed in a timely manner. Being prepared and being ready is going to be key when it comes to PEP, proper subaward preparation. So at this moment, we're going to do a quick little poll for you guys. And let me see if I can pull up this poll. Okay. Just give me a second. Okay. So I'm going to launch the poll and it's going to be the first question only. If you answer the rest, that's fine, but they won't be relevant at this moment. So I'm going to launch the poll and we're going to answer the first question. Can you guys see the poll? Someone, can you see the poll?
Yeah, they should be able to see it.
I see it.
Yes.
I didn't see anything. Okay, got it.
Yes, they do have it. They're coming in on the chat.
I got it now. Thank you. And the poll question is, most of the subawards at your institution/organization are under what kind of prime sponsor? Is it a federal agency or a non-federal agency? Give you guys a couple more seconds. Still a lot of people that haven't responded, which is fine, but so as expected, it looks like majority of the people are going to be federal agency, which is what we expected. I'm going to go ahead and stop the poll, even though I see there's a lot of people still chiming in. I'm just going to stop it because we have a decent amount of information. I'm going to share the results with you guys. So we ended up with 85% federal agency and 15% non-federal agency, which that doesn't surprise us. But at our institution, we're actually in the non-federal agency. And we get a lot of subawards under non-federal agencies. We get a lot under federal agency, but we do a lot of industry prime awards, and we get a lot of subawards under non-federal agencies. But I'm definitely not surprised that the majority was under federal agencies, because that's kind of what we expected. So, okay, I'm going to stop sharing the results and we're going to move forward. So, subawards at proposal stage. As I discussed in the previous slide, PEP, subawards at proposal stage. Every institution does not have the same requirements or require the same documentation for their subs at proposal stages, but these are generally required documents for most. So we have the letter of intent, the LOI, or letter of commitment, a scope of work, an indirect cost rate agreement, a budget justification, and any additional documentation required by the sponsor. What is the subawardee role at proposal? The role and unique qualifications of a proposed subcontractor should be described in the proposal if the desired subcontractor has been identified at the time of proposal submittal. And the subcontractor's budget should be included in the proposal. This is what I discussed in the previous page. We want to make sure that we have all of that information at the time of proposal. The subrecipient scope of work should be clearly outlining subrecipient responsibilities, deliverables, the required deliverables, and specific due dates of each milestone. The subrecipient scope of work should only describe the portion of the work the subaward PI is responsible for. The subaward PI and subaward institution is responsible for. They should not be having scope of work information for what a different institution or another subaward on the project is doing. They should only be having their information in there. Non-federal entities without a federally recognized indirect cost rate agreement may elect to charge a diminished indirect cost rate of 10% of modified total direct costs, which may be used indefinitely.
Danielle, I want to piggyback off something that you were saying back on the slide about the actual documentation. Something that I would like to point out to our research community that is very important, especially with sub awards, is the scope of work for your subrecipient. Your scope of work should really clearly outline what your subrecipient responsibilities are. It also should show what your deliverables are or any specific due dates for your milestones. And as Danielle said, it should only describe the portion of the work that subaward PI is responsible for. I want to say that this is very important, especially on the back end when you are issuing your subawards and you have an issue with your subaward. Because when you have an issue for non-performance, or you're thinking about, we need to terminate because they're not meeting their deliverables, the first thing that we're going to go back and look at is that scope of work. What are they supposed to be doing? And if it is not specifically defined in there, that's going to be a problem. So just remember that your scope of work for your subrecipient is extremely important.
Thank you, Tamara.
Thank you, Danielle.
And if that scope of work changes at the time of award, before the sub agreement has been executed, that's also important that you change. Whether it's the scope of work, the budget, if anything changes, we need to make sure we have that stuff completed. So every institution is different. I know at our institution, we have a couple additional documents that we require at proposal stage, and that includes we have a subaward checklist. So we give these out to our departments, our internal departments only. We give these out internally, but it's like a checklist of things we require at the different stages throughout the subaward process. And it's kind of small, so this document will be available if you guys want to see it later. But we have an at proposal stage and we have an at time of award. And we break it out by the PI, the department administrators, and proposal managers. So everyone is aware of what is needed at those times. And as you can clearly see on here, at time of proposal, it has that scope of work, it has the budget justification, and letter of intent. The subrecipient commitment form, that's something that we use at our institution. If that is done, but if you are a part of the FDP expanded clearinghouse, you do not have to fill out that form. So that is for those organizations or institutions that are not a part of that. Then we require our subrecipient commitment form. Our audit certification and financial status questionnaire, we also require that. If the subrecipient is not subject to the Single Audit Act, then they have to fill out that form. And then we have our subaward predetermination form, which is what Tamara discussed earlier. If there is some kind of confusion or we're not sure, that is also something that we do at the time of proposal.
Danielle, Tamaria, we have a question.
Okay.
If a federal award and the subrecipient is a for-profit company without a negotiated F&A rate, would the prime institution negotiate a rate with the company, or would you accept the rate the company provides with possibly a statement certifying the F&A rate is used consistently by the company?
Okay, so I'll answer that question. So how we handle F&A rates, that is governed by the uniform guidance. So as a pass-through entity, you must have a federally negotiated rate. If you do not have a federally negotiated rate, you have two options. You have the option, whether you're for-profit or nonprofit, to use the 10% de minimis, and that is what we do at my institution here at UCF. Or UCF, as the prime institution, they can negotiate a rate agreement with the subrecipient. Of course, that is a lot of work, and that is not our policy here, so that is not what we do at this institution. So that would definitely be up to your institution. What they could not do was just accept a rate. You can't make up a rate. So basically, you cannot charge the government a made-up rate. So either we would have to, your institution would have to negotiate a rate with that recipient, or they would be required to use the 10% de minimis, or they could not collect any F&A. But what they could not do is make up their own rate. So hopefully that answers your question.
Okay.
There's a second question.
Mm-hmm.
In the proposal, where to attach the statement of work?
Where to attach it?
I think that would depend on your proposal, what type of proposal you're submitting. If you're submitting system to system, different announcements have different requirements. To my knowledge, they all require a statement of work from your actual subrecipient. I don't know any entity that is going to be subbing out money to an institution and they don't know what they're going to be doing or bringing to the project. So I think that would definitely depend on what you're submitting and how it's being submitted. Different RFPs require different information. So I think that would just depend on what you're submitting and how you're submitting that application. So you would have to follow those guidelines of your proposal.
And just to follow up that question, yes, they meant system to system.
Oh, so I guess that would depend on your system. That would depend on your system. Are you submitting, grants.gov? Are you submitting through Fastlane? That would just all depend. It's not a one size fits all. That would just depend.
And just to add also to the scope of works, as far as our institution, not even dealing with the systems, I do know there are some proposals where the scope of works are included in the institution scope of works. So it's not necessarily separated, but I will say at our institution, even if we submit proposals that way, we still require for our sub-recipient scope of works to be separated for internal purposes so that we can do what we need to do. But I do know when it comes to some proposals that there are some where the scope of works are literally embedded into the overall proposal. So you wouldn't even distinguish, you wouldn't even know besides by just seeing the subrecipient name or PI name included into the proposal document. So I just wanted to add that. Okay.
So let's talk about assessing risk. Another requirement of the uniform guidance is that pass-through entities have to evaluate each subrecipient's risk for non-compliance with federal statutes, regulations, terms and conditions of the subaward for purposes of determining the appropriate subrecipient monitoring. So that basically says if we are going to subcontract out some of this federal funds, we are responsible for making sure that third-party entity is appropriate and can meet the needs of the project. We also have to ensure proper stewardship of federal funds, so that this clause definitely includes those subrecipient versus vendor determinations. It requires us to perform pre-award subrecipient reviews and monitoring of the programmatic activities of the subrecipients throughout the life cycle of the federal award. Next slide, please. So with assessing and evaluating that risk, again, this comes from the uniform guidance. We have to evaluate our subrecipient. Some criterion that we use to do that is with the subrecipient, do we have any prior experience with that subrecipient? Does that subrecipient have any prior experience with doing similar work or similar awards? This can be kind of problematic when we have startup companies. So if you had a startup company that had never received a federal award, that would be something that you would be concerned about, and you would probably look at that as a higher risk than a university that has received several awards. The audit is another big thing. What are the results? Have they been audited? Or as Danielle said previously, are they subject to the Single Audit Act? That is a big issue because depending on if they are or if they're not, there is additional information that you're going to have to gather in order to make sure that they are appropriate to receive that award. Whether the actual subrecipient has the actual tools in place to separate funds and manage accounts, manage carryover. Additionally, these are things that you have to think about when you're looking at your subrecipients, and conflicts of interest, their audit findings, if they have material weaknesses, they have significant deficiencies, they have problems with invoicing, tracking equipment, so on and so forth. So you do have to actually evaluate the risk and monitor the risk. So next slide, please. On this slide, we just want to talk about some of the tools that we use that we find helpful in actually assessing the risk of our subrecipients. We, again, are part of the FDP, the Federal Demonstration Partnership. So we do, which is great, and I would encourage institutions that are not part of this clearinghouse to definitely join. It definitely helps with the administrative burden of collecting all of that audit documentation. So we do love it. So we do use that. as a tool. And as Danielle said, depending on if you are part of that clearinghouse or not, depends on what type of subrecipient documentation that we're going to need from you in order to assess risk and move forward with a subcontract with you. Of course, we're all aware of SAM. We look at that information as well, and we also use a system called visual compliance. So we look at that system to make sure that we do not have any restricted parties. So we do that as well from the institution, as well as that PI from the subrecipient institution. So, and we do have forms, as Danielle said, we have a subrecipient commitment form, we have our audit certification and financial status questionnaire, and at our institution, regardless of if you're federal or not, we do use the FDP risk assessment questionnaire and continuing assessment tool to assess and do our audits. So we do use that. We will have all of this information is on our website and on FDP's website, but we will have these documents available along with the presentation.
A couple of more questions, lady. At what point in the process would this evaluation of risk take place?
So it takes place in two places. The risk is being evaluated at proposal stage, and it's also being evaluated at award stage. So at proposal stage, when the proposal managers review the subaward documentation, they're assessing risk as well. But however, when we get the award and it's time to issue the subaward, we do an in-depth risk assessment. So that's when we actually get into the actual audit piece of the risk assessment. So it's a two-part series that we're looking at when we're assessing risk.
Okay, and another question. I belong to a non-university research institution. Are we eligible for the FDP demonstration partnership?
Yes, you are. Yes, you are. All you have to do is there is a submission process. You agree to submit all of this information into the system and they will accept you. So you do not have to be a university or a hospital. And it is wonderful. Let me really highly encourage your institution to do so. It makes things so much easier and so much quicker. You know, our work is already very administratively burdensome with dealing with research, and it just helps the process along very quickly for your other entities to go out and get the information that they need right in this one system without you having to fill out 5 or 6 different forms. But yes, you would be eligible.
One more question. Do you have a checklist for pre-award risk assessment?
I'm not aware that we have a checklist for pre-award risk assessment. I do know what our proposal, because that's handled by our proposal department. So what they do go out to check to see if they're part of the FDP demonstration partnership. We also look at, you know, how much money are we going to be sending out to this third party. We look at the determination as well. So it's very high level. We do not get into the meat, because after we get the award and we said, you know, this is what we're going to do, this is what we said we're going to do, this is what we're going to give to this third party, that is where we really delve into the risk of doing business with this entity. So we just really make sure at proposal time that they're not restricted in any way. They don't have any delinquencies, they're not restricted, and then we'll move forward. But at time of award, that's where we do the real Sherlock Holmes investigation on our subrecipients.
Thank you. No further questions at this time.
No further questions? Okay, wonderful. So since we're talking about risk assessments, we are not going to do a breakout session here, because I see that we are running very low on time and we still want to be able to answer questions. So we have another little case study for you, and we just want, you can put it in the chat, you can raise your hand if you want to speak about it, but we have a actual subrecipient, and this is their scope of work. And we would like to know, based off this information that you have, what level of risk would you assign to the subrecipient? And what are your reasons for assigning that level of risk? So I'll go ahead and read it for you guys and be thinking about it. And please know you can raise your hand, you can interrupt, you can put it in the chat. We are not going to do a breakout session for this. So UGA is a local startup company, and your PI has identified to be a subrecipient on their proposal. This is UGA's first time receiving federal flow through, and they are not subject to the Single Audit Act. UGA's funding will represent 10% of the overall federal funding for the portion of their scope of work, and their only deliverables will be progress reports. So again, with that information, what level of risk would you assign to the subrecipient, and what are your reasons for assigning that level of risk? And Celeste, you can read out the responses or unmute people as they need to be unmuted.
Sure. Okay, we have a question from Tasha. At application or award, or both, do you check for SAM registration and department suspension? Scenario is that the institution is not in the FTP clearinghouse.
Is she, just to clarify, you're saying that do we check for SAM's registration and debarment only if the subrecipient is not in the FTP clearinghouse? Is that the question, Tasha?
Let me see if I can unmute her.
Hi. So with the changes that are upcoming with uniform guidance, or with that were effective November 12th, they're updating it to where we have to make sure that everybody has a SAM registration, or at least partial SAM registration. And so at our institution, we were checking for debarment and suspension and SAM registration, excuse me, at award, or when we were preparing the subaward, but we've since changed it to where we are checking at application. We're checking to make sure they have a SAM registration, and also prior to providing the subaward agreement. So I was just curious as to how other institutions were handling that.
Okay, Tasha, I could say for us at UCF, we do check it at both. We check it at both. And even with the debarred and suspended at time of award, we actually go a little further. As I've stated, we used visual compliance to even go further to check all the restricted parties list, just not what is in SAM's. So at UCF, we do both, but I also would be interested in know what other institutions are doing.
Thank you.
We got several responses. Heather says it would be a higher risk due to it as a startup company, and it is their first time receiving federal flow-through funds. Another comment, low to medium risk, because we would require that last audit paperwork in lieu of the Single Audit Act. We have a third comment, high risk, first time UGA is receiving federal flow-through funds, and there is no financial reporting to monitor expenses are appropriate. Another comment, high risk, they are a new startup and first time receiving federal funds. And Robert commented, I would probably assess risk as high. As a startup company, they likely do not have audited financials, nor will they have a well-developed internal control structure. We have several other comments. Jennifer, on the case study, the fact that they had not had federal before would put them at a higher risk, in my opinion. Kim says, I think high risk So no prior experience, no single audit or federal awards. Jody Fisher, while they're a startup and relatively inexperienced, their only deliverables are progress reports, which doesn't sound particularly high risk to me. Interested to hear what others have to say as I'm quite new to my role. And lastly, Gayla Pierce, I hope I pronounced that correctly. I would think high risk for being a startup and for not being subject to single audits. However, I wonder if just providing progress reports would put them at lower risk.
So wonderful, all great responses. I love that everybody really, really considered the elements that you have to think about, especially, you know, there were several of you that pointed out their only deliverable is progress reports. That's all that they will be delivering. A lot of people also pointed out that their scope of work only represents 10%. It's only 10% of our federal award. And again, the fact that they have never received an audit, this will be their first federal award. So you also have to think about your institution and what your institution's appetite is for risk. You know, what does your institution define as high risk, low risk? For this particular entity and my institution, they would definitely be medium risk. We would do medium because what we would do in this case, you know, we would definitely get all of the financial information that we could to make sure that they would not default, but also we would mitigate that risk. We would write their agreement in a way that those reports and deliverables, that money would be tied to them actually doing the work and delivering on what they said they're going to do. So you can mitigate the risk at this institution. We do not go into agreements. We won't not do business with you just because we feel like you're a high risk. What we will do is add terms and conditions and structure your subaward agreement to lessen and mitigate that risk. So all excellent, wonderful responses.
We have another question to Maria. Since UGA is not subject to single audit, should they provide their financial audit status? What other audit documents can be requested?
Yes, they still, even though they don't, because some, which we've had some institutions that don't, they business entities that have never been audited. They've actually not had a federal or private audit ever. So, and then we're asking for their financial documentation. You know, we want to know, you know, your tax information. We need to know what your balance sheet looks like. We need to know your financials. So we will definitely look that entity up, and we do request financial information and on our financial status questionnaire, it gets into the exact questions that we need to ask. So yes, we do get financial information. They can't just provide us nothing because they're not subject to an audit or they've never had an audit. So that would not be sufficient. So basically we want what you have. You may not have an audit, but you do have financial documentation as an actual registered business, and we want that information.
Okay, and we have a comment from Laura. In follow-up to the for-profit companies without negotiated rates, we have found that the de minimis 10% does not apply to for-profit entities and only applies to nonprofit. The company would need a negotiated rate with the pass-through entity or an established negotiated rate agreement with government. C2 CFR 200.414F, which indicates de minimis rate is available to non-federal entities. Then see non-federal entity definition at 2 CFR 200.1, which does not include for-profit or commercial organizations.
So Celeste, what was the question?
It wasn't a question, it was just a statement.
Oh,
Yeah.
thank you.
Thank you, Laura. And then we have a question from Ginger. Do you require the subrecipient to fill out the subrecipient commitment form and the audit certification and financial status questionnaire if they are not subject to the Single Audit Act?
Yes, we do. Because the information is a little different. It's not the same information on both forms. So yes, they are required to fill out both.
No further questions.
Wonderful. Well, we want to thank you guys for our sitting in our presentation. Please know this is part 1. We do have a part 2 on Thursday, and we will make this presentation available along with all of the other presentations and the documentation available to all participants.
Okay, well, that concludes our session on managing the subaward life cycle, part 1. Again, part 2 will be offered on Thursday at 1 p.m. We hope you can join us for the second part of the presentation. I want to thank everyone for participating and making this a fun and interactive experience. If you have additional questions, please feel free to send them to our presenters. We will also make sure that any questions we didn't get to are provided to our presenters at the end of the conference. Our next session on research compliance, what is the big deal, will begin at 4 p.m. In between sessions, please feel free to join our breakout rooms to meet up with colleagues and network. Thank you to our speakers, Tamaria and Danielle, and thank you all for your participation.